Chapter 1016 News from the Numinous Episcopate, 160 Boakland Street, inside Dwayne Dantes's mansion. Klein stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching as the rain began to descend, along with the wind. The rain hit the ground and the glass, intersecting to form a mesh. Ever since autumn, Backland had started to rain again. It brought with it a lingering coldness and humidity. Klein stood there motionless for a long time, watching silently into the distance through the blurry, rainy scene, his eyes unfocused. Only when his spiritual perception was triggered did he stop his wandering thoughts and turned his head to the side. Raynette, with the 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in her hand, had a letter as she walked out of the void. Klein asked Miss Messenger out of habit.
"Who is it from this time?"
The last letter he received came from Sharon. The lady had told him that she had successfully completed the ritual and advanced to Sequence 4 Puppet of the Prisoner pathway. Klein first sincerely congratulated her and apologetically informed her that he had already obtained what he needed and didn't need to visit Calderon City in the spirit world anytime soon. Of course, he also indicated that there was a huge secret there that might have something to do with him. He would probably head there one day, and when that time came, if Miss Sharon had the time or was willing, he wished to obtain her support. For Klein, on the one hand, he might have to head there to find the future ingredients he needed for his advancement. On the other hand, he believed that the magical city that involved ancient death, Phoenix ancestor Grace, also might contain the method to heal Mr. Azek's incomplete spirit bodies. Even if this death consul didn't have the means to advance, he hoped that by doing so, the former didn't need to repeatedly suffer the torment of losing his memories. Of course, Klein had prepared a plan for that. It was to wait until he advanced to Sequence 3 Scholar of Yore. He could prepare more Yesterday Once More charms for Mr. Azek, or he could imbue him with the corresponding Beyonder powers to speed up the recovery of his memories each time. At that moment, Klein had already received a letter. Renette Tinneker's 4 heads replied one after another.
From that undying idiot.
Miss Messenger never showed interest in such matters before. I wonder when it began. Most of the people who write to me have been given nicknames, except Miss Sharon.
As Klein silently mumbled, he unfurled the letter and gave it a quick scan. In the letter, Patrick Bryan said that the Southern Continent's orders were no longer about getting him to make various attempts to awaken death. Instead, they got him to prepare a special ritual and help the Death Domain Angel inside the mausoleum, Artificial Death Faction's leader, Hater, recover. It was to allow him to have the means to temporarily leave the land in which he sealed himself. Such an order didn't seem problematic on the surface, but it was a little sudden. However, Klein still sensed something amiss.
The Artificial Death Faction of the Numinous Episcopate in the Southern Continent had previously made Patrick continue the strange but dangerous rituals to awaken death. I managed to trick them by instructing him to use excuses such as the inability to gather the materials or the ultimate failure of the experiment. Now they finally suspected that there's something wrong with Patrick.
Klein nodded in thought. He suspected that this was a test directed at Patrick Bryan, a test that pointed towards an angel. An angel's response to rituals covered the entire world.
Yes, it's good as long as they don't suspect there's a problem with artificial death. After all, they've inherited a huge inheritance from the ancient Balaam Empire. Who knows if they have a way to affect the goddess's progress in controlling the death pathway's uniqueness? It could be a bane for both sides.
Klein analyzed for a moment before heaving a sigh of relief. As for the test by the Death Domain Angel, he didn't think much of it. This was because the Fool could also direct power at the same level. With Angel's embrace, a disruption effect could be made. As long as the high priest named Hater didn't descend in person and only exerted influence remotely, he could carry out misdirections in an ingenious manner. After figuring this out, Klein flicked his wrist, igniting Patrick Bryan's letter with scarlet flames. As he returned to his desk, he took out a pen and paper and wrote,
"You may proceed according to your teacher's instructions, but before the actual ritual, you must report this to me and gain my permission."
As the interval between the receiving and sending of letters were short, Patrick Bryan likely remained in his original spot. Klein didn't summon Patrick's messenger and instead blew the adventurer's harmonica and handed the folded letter to Renette Tinnaker. Amidst the drizzle, Sio draped a simple raincoat, lined with tree sap over her and hid in the shadows, staring at the side door of Viscount Stratford's residence. It wasn't even evening, but the street lamps were already lit up. They emitted a faint glow in the rain. After a while, a rental carriage drove over from afar and stopped in front of the side door in a remote area. The Viscount's valet that had been hiding immediately ran out, opening an umbrella. He sheltered the cloaked woman down the carriage and quickly passed through the side door. As for the rental carriage, it remained in its spot without leaving. It had apparently been paid a sufficient amount of money. Shio still failed to see the woman's appearance, but she wasn't disheartened by it. She patiently waited in the cold rain as though she had turned into a motionless statue. She planned on attempting to tail the woman once she came out to confirm her identity. This was both an opportunity for her to obtain the Judge Potion formula, and it was also the reason why she came to Backland, to investigate the truth of her father's death. And it was because she was spurred by such motives that Gio had persisted in monitoring Viscount Stratford to this day. MI9's other intelligence officers had already ended the mission due to the lack of any developments over the previous few months. Even the golden-masked man who had designated the mission hadn't asked about this in weeks. Clearly, he didn't place any importance on it. Inside Viscount Stratford's bedroom, a beautiful brown-haired girl wore a silk gown and sat in front of a dressing table. She was fiddling with the skincare and makeup products as if she had discovered a treasure trove. Viscount Stratford, who was already middle-aged, wore a male nightgown and walked to the beautiful girl with his hair still moist. He smiled at her reflection in the mirror and said,
"Charmaine, you no longer need those to add to your beauty."
It's just a type of female instinct.
The young girl named Charmaine raised her hand with a smile, pressing down on the Viscount's palm that had been placed on her shoulder. Viscount Stratford smiled gently and said,
"When you touch them, you have a pure and innocent air to you. Heh, you make me discover my youth, like the days when I was only 18.
Without waiting for Charmaine's reply, he continued,
My wife had already passed away for years. I always imagined I would live until the Lord beckons for me, but who knew that I would meet you? In a while, when the pressure accumulated in Backland is relieved, I will find a chance to walk down the wedding aisle to the altar with you."
Wedding. You want to marry me?
Charmaine was taken aback as she asked in disbelief. Viscount Stratford smiled and said,
"Meeting you is a gift from the Lord. Although you aren't of noble birth, I've already married once. I don't have to consider such matters anymore. Of course, I'll think of means to raise your standing in society. Yes, I'll first find a merchant to recognize you as his illegitimate daughter."
He droned on about his plan until he saw Charmaine's eyes filled with tears in the mirror's reflection.
"The most precious thing about you is that you treat me 10 times better than how well I treat you, and you don't hide it."
Viscount Stratford smiled as he lowered his head and kissed the top of Charmaine's head. Charmaine opened her mouth, seemingly crying and laughing. Only when the drizzle stopped and night fell did Gio finally wait for the woman in a dark red cloak walk out and board the carriage. After memorizing the carriage's traits, Shio tailed it from afar, using her beyonder powers as a sheriff in the empty streets at night to follow the target simply by walking or running. She went all the way from Empress Borough to the Backland Bridge area. Even with her stamina, she was almost at her limit, but thankfully, the carriage finally came to a stop. Shio brightened up as she switched her target from the carriage to the cloaked woman and continued tailing her. During this process, she was surprised that the woman had very good anti-tracking abilities. She would occasionally take detours and pause using obstacles. However, this didn't stump Zio, since she was already an experienced sheriff. She patiently tailed from afar without coming too close. Just as she sensed that the woman wasn't too far from her final destination and that she was finally about to catch up to her, she suddenly caught the scent of a sweet, ethereal fragrance. Shio's mind went into a daze amidst the fragrance before she completely lost track of her target. As for the fragrance, it had vanished as though it had never appeared. Shio's pupils widened slightly. She didn't dare to search her surroundings for any traces. Inside a rental apartment, Trissy, with a gentle and sweet face that made one unable to resist looking at her, looked at the mirror reflecting Charmaine and said,
You seem to be in a good mood. How was it? This final mission isn't too unacceptable, right? Once you complete it, you can leave Backland and start your own life.
Charmaine was taken aback as her expression turned complicated, as though she was disheartened. It was as though she had suddenly snapped out of her dreams. She didn't turn her head as her lips quivered while replying.
He said that he wishes to marry me.
Trissy immediately pricked up her brows.
You mustn't believe a man's words during those times. You and I should know this very well. If he really wishes to marry you, he wouldn't be wary of you. He will wish to have a child with you. Heh, did he do so?
Upon hearing her question, Charmaine's mood turned sullen. Trissy stood up and said with a smile,
I'm not stopping you from pursuing your love. If you wish to turn this temporary mission into a permanent one, you should think about what needs to be done.
After ethereally finishing her sentence, she walked to the door and left the rented apartment. While heading down the staircase, Trissy suddenly noticed her shoes. She chuckled and said in a seemingly self-deprecating manner,
Love.
Chapter 1017, Maygur Manor, Backland, Empress Borough, in the outskirts towards the northwest. This was a place that needed more than 1 hour via horse carriage. Maygur Manor was built by the side of the Tussock River, so it had beautiful scenery around it with flourishing vegetation within its confines. Strangely enough, Backland's city areas had perennial rain with relatively few sunny days. However, in the outskirts, the clouds tended to be thin and the sun was always bright. Despite the short distance, the two places had completely different weather. It was most obvious within the northwestern outskirts. It was even a rather famous grape plantation in the northern continent. And by following the Tussock River from this region northwest for another 50 kilometers, one would again encounter weather similar to Backland's city area. Such situations left meteorologists puzzled. They couldn't find any suitable theories to explain the reason. However, Klein had a vague guess. In the Fourth Epoch, this was the capital of the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire. It was also here that Blood Emperor Alista abandoned his humanity and became a crazy deity. Therefore, it was normal that the weather and terrain had changed forever in those very small confines. Leonard Mitchell had once mentioned information about this during one of the free exchanges. Furthermore, as an area with a long history and signs of early human activity, this land of hope buried countless ancient ruins. It was very possible that they could have an influence on the weather. The carriage drove into Maygur Manor, passing by the fountain pond and small garden that was surrounded by the main building. Finally, it stopped outside the main door. Just as Klein got off the carriage with butler Walter, he saw the land steward, Richardson, lead 2 rows of male and female servants by the door, awaiting their employer. Compared to 160 Balkland Street, there were more servants here, but they were mainly lower-class servants. Looking at Richardson wearing a spanking new suit, Klein nodded with a smile.
Well done.
Without waiting for Richardson to reply, he took off his hat and handed it along with his cane to his valet, Enuni, while asking,
Have you prepared the activity room for the ladies to chat and for men to play cards in?
Yes, sir. I've placed poker cards, tarot cards, and some board games. The piano, violins, and other common musical instruments have also been moved inside.
Richardson answered eloquently. Klein passed through the door and nodded.
Where's the smoking room for the gentlemen?
Like the ladies, it's all on the 2nd floor. They're separated by 5 rooms.
Richardson didn't need the servants in the manor to remind him. He didn't even need to recall to give an answer. To ensure that his employer's first hunting excursion was flawless, he had taken note of every nitty-gritty detail. Although it exhausted him physically, he was excited mentally. Klein asked about dinner and the guest rooms and confirmed that everything was in place. Before long, he received the first batch of guests after Maygur Manor had a change of name, now known as Dante's Manor. Member of Parliament Mocked and his family. Mocked took off his coat with a smile and handed it to a servant while praising.
This place is much bigger than my Moose Manor. I've always heard of Maygur's wine being of excellent quality, but I've never had the chance of tasting it. I can finally have my curiosity satisfied today.
I hope you won't be disappointed.
Klein smiled modestly. As a famous area for grape plantations in the northern continent, champagne, red wine, and white wine were considered the finest in Backland's northwestern outskirts. But with the manor here mainly owned by the nobles, self-brewed alcoholic beverages were typically not sold to the public. Therefore, it was almost unheard of. Only people from high society or those related to them would know of this. Maygur was one of the most iconic manors. The wine that it brewed was widely praised by people in the know. Red wine of certain years was even offered at more than £100 a bottle by collectors. However, for Klein to be able to buy this manor for £20,000, he naturally had to agree to certain conditions. All the wine from certain years were to be taken away by Duke Negan's servants. Mocht was rather clear about this and didn't expect to drink famous wine commodities. He said with a laugh,
You can open a few bottles and pour a small glass of each for me. Let me decide which of the remaining wine is most spectacular.
As a member of high society, he had never tasted the wine of Maygur Manor. The reason was simple. He was a member of the new party, and the previous owner, Duke Negan, was the main sponsor of the Conservative Party.
No problem.
Klein immediately agreed as his gaze swept across Hazel's face. Compared to July and August, this girl had clearly cheered up. She no longer felt apprehensive when facing strangers. Previously, it was as bad as not willing to participate in any banquets or balls. This made those familiar with her think she was sick. And this was all thanks to Audrey. Whenever she met Duane Dantes at the Lowen Charity Bursary Foundation, she had mentioned that she had recently met Miss Hazel Mocht 2 times. Such communication didn't seem problematic at first glance, since Hazel was a common acquaintance of Audrey and Dantes. Finding a topic about a common friend was common in idle chatter. However, Klein could read Miss Justice's hints and understood that she had met Hazel 2 times at different balls and banquets and had treated her 2 times. After getting Mocht's family settled in, Klein welcomed the second batch of guests for the weekend hunting trip, Brigadier General Cornus Kilgore, who had come with a friend that he had previously mentioned. Klein knew this friend, but he didn't know Duane Dantes. He was a steam car mogul, Framus Cage. He was one of the main investors of the bicycle project. He had relied on a lawyer suspected to be a beyonder with the lawyer sequence and had bought the 10% shares from Sherlock Moriarty at a cheap price.
Since he's related to a lawyer, it can be explained how he's an Earl of the Fallen's friend.
Klein went forward with a smile and hugged Brigadier General Cunas and Framus Cage.
Welcome.
He then stepped back and said to the portly, light blue-eyed Framus, who was a quarter Fasac,
I heard your steam car is very famous. Why didn't you drive it over?
Before Framus could answer, the manly Cornus Kilgore said with a smile,
No, you don't understand him. He will never give up the chance to showcase his steam car. However, the car's too heavy. On the way here, it fell into a ditch and couldn't be pulled out. Thankfully, I never believed his claims and rode on a carriage myself, following behind him. Otherwise, he would have had to cover the remaining distance on foot.
The main problem is that our roads are terrible. They need to be renovated and rebuilt. They need metal tracks to be paved, just like steam locomotives. I was planning on seeking some investments from you. Haha, we can talk about it later.
Framus retorted and threw his hands up.
You were the one who invested in us previously, but now you're asking me for an investment.
Only then did Klein realize that he was a rather famous tycoon in the upper class of the kingdom. He had donated shares worth more than £10,000 and had purchased an expensive manor. He had also established connections with the military, so it was obvious he was rich.
But in fact, my current net worth is only 50 to 60,000 gold pounds, perhaps a tenth of Miss Justice's wealth. I wonder when I can really become a tycoon with a net worth of £1 million.
Klein thought in a self-deprecating manner. After some thought, he said,
It's fine. I'm very interested in the fusion of machinery and steam. When I'm free, I can take a look at your steam car.
Framus immediately said with a smile.
Spectacular. If I didn't know that you had donated a large sum to the Church of Evernight, I might even think of you as a believer of the god of steam.
I've drawn the triangular sacred emblem on my chest in the past, after all.
Klein didn't continue on this topic, afraid that Quonas would discover his intentions. He pointed to the staircase and said,
Why don't you head to the smoking room to try some of the prized cigar collections here? It wasn't until I bought this manor that I learned that there was a room specially for storing cigars. Its temperature and humidity are maintained, but as you know, I can smoke, but I don't like it.
Quonas Kilgore's face suffused a smile.
Not bad. Do you have chieftain?
Of course.
Klein gave a positive answer. There was only one goal in organizing this hunting trip. It was to hunt this Brigadier General, Deputy Director of MI9. Therefore, he had taken into consideration all his preferences. However, Klein wasn't in a hurry to take action for this hunting trip. This was because he still lacked an understanding of Quonas Kilgore's actual strength as a hidden demigod. He needed more gatherings and hunts to figure out his preferences, level of alertness, and the items he brought with him. As a magician, Klein didn't perform unprepared. In an apartment in Chairwood Borough, Fors put down the book in her hand and looked at Shio, who was pacing around the activity room. She couldn't help but ask,
What are you troubled about?
Shio shot her a glance and said,
I'm frustrated over whether to inform MI9 about Viscount Stratford's close relationship with an unknown woman, or to keep it from them until there's further development.
Fors first asked in return before giving her answer.
Why are you keeping it from them? Viscount Stratford is related to your father's death, but you normally lack the opportunity or strength to confront him, afraid of being exposed and affecting your mother and brother. And now he might encounter an accident because of that unknown woman. He's in a relatively easy-to-deal-with state. This is your opportunity, so you're being hesitant. Right?
Yo fell silent for a moment before saying,
Yes.
Fors closed the book, stared at her friend, and said in a serious manner,
Since you're hesitating, it means you're already inclined towards one option.
Shio slowly nodded and said,
Yes.
Fors fondled her slightly long curly hair and stood up, extending her right hand, and said,
I already know your decision. Well, do you need help?
Seeing Shio hesitant to give an answer, she laughed and said,
I'm a Sequence 6, Beyonder.
Without waiting for Shio to answer, she looked around.
If you're worried, we can still seek additional help.
She was implying that they could get help from the members of the Tarot Club. Io thought about it and exhaled.
Not for now. Let's try it first. Let's head out now and continue monitoring Viscount Stratford.
Fors was taken aback.
Now? All right. But before that, let me use the crystal ball to do some astromancy to confirm the level of danger.
After some work, she held the pure crystal ball in one hand and said,
There's a certain level of danger.
Chapter 1018, Unexpected. Empress Borough, by the side of Viscount Stratford's mansion. Fors and Shio, who were dressed in black dresses, hid in a dark corner. They stared intently at the tightly closed metal gates as they patiently waited for their target to appear. It wasn't raining tonight, so they didn't have to face harsh weather conditions. The carriage that remained parked by the side of the street lamps made it clear to them that their patience would be rewarded. It was only a matter of time. After an unknown period of time, the gates produced a heavy metal groan as they slowly opened. A figure in a black cloak appeared with its head bowed. The figure walked to the side of the carriage and nimbly boarded the carriage. Fors lowered her voice and asked Shio,
Is that her?
She didn't have Beyonder powers that could restore a target's characteristics from a mere description, and she had never seen her before. Therefore, she couldn't rely on her spiritual intuition or astromancy to make a judgment. Shio nodded in affirmation and said,
Yes.
As they quietly conversed, the rental carriage sped up and left the side gates. So immediately left her hiding spot, prepared to use her sheriff's Beyonder powers, and the physical enhancement that being an interrogator gave her to lock onto her target while jogging. At that moment, Fors pressed down on her shoulder, foiling her plans.
What are you doing?
Track her.
Zio looked back at her friend in puzzlement. Fors looked at the rental carriage that hadn't completely pulled away from them and asked thoughtfully,
Why are you tracking her for? Also, didn't you say that the target has a rather powerful Beyonder protecting her once you enter the Backland Bridge area?
That's right.
Shio first answered the second question, before saying,
Your question is very odd. The reason you track someone is to determine the target's appearance, identity, and motives.
Fors retracted her left hand from Sio's shoulder and revealed a smile.
Since the target is protected by a rather powerful Beyonder, it will be difficult for us to complete the tracking in the Backland Bridge area. We won't be able to find her residence and figure out her true identity. Do you wish to directly fight her guardian? Although you have me to help, are you certain about that person's strength? How certain are you? Will it be very dangerous? Besides, once the battle begins, it will definitely alarm the target. This is the same as stopping the carriage midway and confronting her directly. It will foil your primary objective. It will alarm Viscount Stratford and prevent him from falling into a predicament that will offer you a chance to take action.
If we do it, then there's a possibility of failure, but failure is certain if we do nothing.
Sio emphasized that she knew the situation well. All she wanted was to make an attempt and find an opportunity midway. At this moment, the rental carriage had already turned into another street at the end of the road. Force watched the back of it gradually disappear as she shook her head and smiled.
No. We need to change our way of thinking. We should first attempt to figure out the target's appearance. After daybreak, we can use her appearance to perform normal investigations in the Backland Bridge area and then obtain information from other channels.
Your choice of words is very professional.
Shio said in thought.
Of course. I've written detective novels before.
Force answered without any sense of modesty.
But how do I figure out what the target looks like without alerting her?
Shio raised the most critical question. Prepared, Force took out Lemano's travels and said with a smile,
Elementary. Using the psychological invisibility Miss Justice recorded?
Although Audrey didn't encounter any situations that required her to use Lemano's travels, she had rented it thrice out of curiosity. She studied the uses and traits of the Beyonder powers recorded, and she recorded her own Beyonder powers into it. This included the rather useful psychological invisibility. As for her true identity, Shio and Force were increasingly certain of it, but they didn't directly ask or do any further investigations. That was the most basic form of respect towards other Tarot Club members. After hearing her friend's answer, Shio came to a realization and was instantly inspired. Force continued.
By using the Beyonder powers on this page, you will be placed in the sensory blind spots of all surrounding creatures. They wouldn't be able to see you even if you were to jump around in front of them. That way, you can directly board the carriage and stand in front of the target, openly taking in her appearance and remember all her traits. Heh. I sometimes think that people who use psychological invisibility might end up being squashed to death by huge creatures that happen to walk past if they're unlucky. Don't make too much noise later, don't speak to any nearby creatures, or else you will garner attention. Let psychological invisibility be dispelled automatically.
Yeah.
Sio nodded, then she raised another issue.
How do I prevent the target from discovering the sudden opening of the carriage door while it's driving?
Without waiting for Force's reply, she immediately pressed.
Did you record the door opening Beyonder power?
Guess?
Force smiled as she handed Lemano's travels to her friend, telling her which pages psychological invisibility and door opening were on. With this in mind, Zio immediately ran amidst the shadows, chasing after the rental carriage. Before long, she saw her target. Her right hand immediately trembled as she made the bronze-green notebook reveal a yellowish-brown goatskin page. She slid her fingers gently, and Zio seemed to see countless rippling light appear on the surface of a deep lake spread outwards. When her vision returned to normal, she sped up and rushed to the side of the carriage. To ensure nothing went wrong, Co didn't immediately take action. With a few wide strides, she overtook the horse. She then turned around as though she was crossing the road. However, the carriage driver didn't notice her, nor did he shout out to her or rein in the horse. After confirming the effects of psychological invisibility, she sped up and dodged the horse's galloping and came to the side of the carriage. After a brief observation, she flipped through Le Mano's travels and revealed a white page covered with strange patterns and symbols. Then she reached out her right hand and pressed it on the surface of the carriage. Her figure instantly turned transparent as she appeared inside. The woman in a black cloak was sitting diagonally opposite her as if she was in thought, staring at the glass window where Co stood. However, she didn't notice the bounty hunter who had suddenly infiltrated. At such a close distance, even with her cloak lowered, Co was able to see her face clearly. Furthermore, the woman wasn't as careful as she was while walking outside. Her every action appeared rather casual, as the hood was only at her eyes. Instantly, her appearance was reflected in Co's eyes, overlapping with a face that still had some male characteristics. This was a beyonder power of a sheriff. Zio's eyes widened as she couldn't help but shout.
Sherman.
She could foresee that the woman who often entered Viscount Stratford's residence was rather beautiful, but she never expected the woman to be her friend, Sherman. He was once a young man. A man who wasn't considered androgynous now looked beautiful. He had the charm of a woman. At that moment, Co couldn't help but size up Sherman. She couldn't associate her figure with the young man she used to know with each other. If it wasn't for her sheriff beyond her powers that allowed her to confirm that the person opposite her was Sherman, Gio definitely would have imagined that she had made a mistake. And even so, she still suspected whether the person wasn't Sherman and was instead Sherman's twin sister. Upon hearing the surprised question, Sherman realized that there was another person in the carriage at some point in time. Someone familiar. Bounty hunter Zio Duresha. Having already changed her name to Charmaine, she was first alarmed, but the words Trissy often mentioned instinctively appeared in her mind.
You cannot meet people you used to know. Do you want your husband, your beloved, to know of your former state? Only by completely severing your connections can you be reborn, doing so in order to save yourself.
Such words quickly flashed across Charmaine's mind as a terrifying thought emerged in her thoughts.
Kill her!
This thought seemed to come from a demon in the abyss as it constantly whispered in Charmaine's ear as it resonated in her heart.
Kill her. Kill this person who recognized you. Only by doing so can you truly escape the past and not lose the present. Kill her.
Charmaine didn't answer Gio's question. Her left hand slowly clenched up while slightly trembling. Gio sensed the intense emotions running through the person opposite her and confirmed that it was Sherman. Immediately, she asked in concern,
How did you become like this? Where have you been all this time? Did you encounter something? Were you hurt?
Charmaine's lips quivered as her left fist relaxed a little. She said with a sobbing tone,
I've already begun a new life. Don't disturb me again, all right? I don't want to lose everything I have now. I don't want to see people that I knew in the past.
The more she spoke, the faster it became. It became obvious that it was a plea. Gio was taken aback for a few seconds before staring at Sherman. Pursing her lips, she said,
Okay.
She didn't stay any longer and reached out to open the carriage window and jumped out. Charmaine silently watched this entire process and finally exhaled before she slumped into her seat like she had lost all her strength. It wasn't easy for her to control the demon in her heart. At this moment, she saw a figure rapidly outline itself out of thin air beside her. The figure wore a black, old-fashioned dress, but it didn't diminish her beauty and disposition. She sat there silently without a word, but it was impossible to not look at her. Demoness Trissy, Trissy asked with a smile, not revealing any gloominess. It was as like an idle chat where she would ask what she had drunk the previous night.
Why didn't you kill her?
She's one of the few people who didn't ostracize me. She even helped me.
Charmaine replied in shock before frowning.
Why are you here?
Trissy smiled and said,
I'm protecting you.
Without waiting for Charmaine's answer, she said,
You seemed to be in a good mood when you came out.
Charmaine recalled what had happened and bashfully said,
Maybe, perhaps, I have a chance of becoming a mother.
As she spoke, she touched her stomach with her right hand. The corner of her lips couldn't help but curl.
I feel him kicking me.
Charmaine suddenly froze and blurted.
How could it be so fast?
She wasn't sure if she could get pregnant today. Upon seeing her reaction, Trissy smiled even more charmingly. Chapter 1019, Patience.
How was it? Did you take a good look?
Just as Fors left the street where Viscount Stratford's mansion was, she saw Shio walk out with a down and vacant expression. Shio nodded hesitantly.
I did.
Having said that, she seemed to come to her senses and said in shock,
I know her. No, him.
Him.
Fors was confused. L'As Doe habitually observed her surroundings before saying,
He's Sherman, the Sherman I told you about. He actually became a woman.
Fors was stunned as she subconsciously asked,
Were you mistaken? Could she be Sherman's sister?
Shio firmly shook her head.
No, she admitted it herself and even told me not to disturb her. She wants to bid farewell to her past. But how did he become a woman?
Fors's eyes darted around as she suddenly recalled something. She said in thought,
It's not impossible either. There's a beyonder pathway that allows a man to become a woman at a certain stage.
She recalled Miss Justice, female, mentioning something similar during a free exchange session.
Ah, really?
Shio's widened as she asked in disbelief.
Yes.
Fors had already recalled the exact conditions as she gave a rather confident answer.
This.
Gio was momentarily unable to accept it, but she couldn't find a rebuttal. All she could do was ask,
Which pathway is it?
Fors replied.
Demoness! It's the assassin pathway.
Demoness. Sherman actually became a demoness.
Shio repeated to herself. Suddenly, her voice became louder.
Could it be that she's being taken advantage of? No, I must warn her.
Just as she said that, Sio turned around and ran with great strides in an attempt to catch up to the rental carriage again. However, she couldn't find the target after attempting to pursue it for a few blocks. Sherman, female, and the carriage seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Shio gradually slowed down and finally stopped. She looked at the bustling streets ahead of her with a complicated expression. Behind her, Fors, female, passed through a few walls and finally caught up to her.
Gone.
Sio whispered. Fors, female, also cast her gaze forward and thoughtfully replied,
We were discovered.
Without waiting for Zhou, female, to speak, she turned around and sighed.
Let's return and find another opportunity.
Sio, female, didn't take a step forward as she continued standing there. After a few seconds, she said under Fors's female, puzzled gaze,
Since they discovered a problem, will they speed up their plans ahead of time?
It's possible. If they don't wish for their plans to be foiled, they might attempt one final strike tonight before we're prepared.
Fors, female, immediately agreed with Zio, female.
Let's return to Viscount Stratford's mail place and hide in a more concealed spot. We'll continue monitoring it.
Shio, female, immediately nodded and replied without any hesitation.
Okay.
In the dock area inside a warehouse with plenty of goods. Charmaine, female, was sitting on a dirty wooden crate. Her hands were crossed behind her back as her body had thin but firm spider webs coiled around her. She appeared as though she was encased in a transparent cocoon, unable to make a single sound.
It's not a bad thing for you.
Trissy, female, stood in front of Charmaine, female, with a pitch-black flame that resembled ink burning in her palm.
At the very least, you can determine if he really loves you or is lying to you.
Charmaine, female, was angry and afraid. She desperately used her whimpers to express her wish, but Trissy, female, was unmoved. She turned her flame-wielding palm around and pressed it into Charmaine's, female, stomach. The flames seemed to have intelligence as they scattered, like flowing water. Following that, they penetrated her skin and flesh in an attempt to drill inside. Trissy's, female, smooth black hair flared up in defiance of the laws of nature. They were being pulled by invisible hands as they extended out in every direction. It stained the surrounding air with a peculiar smell. The strands of hair thickened as they scattered into distinct strands. Beneath them, dark beams of light surged, bringing about curses and words. They flowed rapidly, fusing into the pitch-black flames. Upon entering Charmaine's female stomach, they quickly vanished. Charmaine's female face twitched uncontrollably, but she didn't feel any pain. It was as though it was purely on reflex. She soon calmed down as she saw Trissy's female figure turn faint and gradually turn transparent until it vanished. Charmaine's female pupils widened as she struggled again, but she was unable to break free from her restraints. She tried again and again like a flood was rising, centimeter by centimeter, inside the silent warehouse. After an unknown period of time, the door to the warehouse opened with a thud and slammed into the two sides of the wall. A figure staggered in. It was the middle-aged Viscount Stratford, male. He didn't wear his white wig like he always did while outside. This revealed his rather high, receding hairline and rather messy black hair. The latter was stuck together as though it had been drenched by a storm and was air-dried. But in the past few hours, the clouds were thin and the crimson moon high in the sky. It hadn't rained at all. Drops of sweat dripped down Viscount Stratford's male, rather cut facial contours as there were countless black threads flowing beneath his skin. His body was slightly hunched, and his facial muscles were somewhat twisted. His eyes were filled with pain and concern. He surveyed the area and was delighted when he found Charmaine, female. However, he turned anxious as he charged over without much confidence. When Charmaine, female, saw him enter the warehouse, her face lit up as though it was covered in a halo. She then revealed a worried and fearful expression as she attempted to shake her head frantically. However, her neck was held firmly by the spider webs that prevented her movement. She reeled in anxiety to the point of tears flowing out of her eyes, drop after drop, crystalline and frail. Just as Viscount Stratford, male, was about to reach her, a loud bang suddenly rang out between the two. It was as though there was an invisible wall that separated him from Charmaine, female, one that couldn't be surpassed.
If you wish to break the curse and take her away, you have to answer my question without hiding anything.
At this moment, a figure quickly appeared in a corner of the warehouse. Her facial features were charming, forming together into an abnormally sweet look. She resembled the lover that every young lad would fantasize about in his youth. She was none other than Demoness Trissy, female. Without waiting for Viscount Stratford's male response, she raised her right hand and conjured a pitch-black flame. Viscount Stratford's male face, hands, neck, and exposed skin instantly turned transparent as they protruded with blood vessels, and in every blood vessel there was a black flame silently burning as it flowed silently. The pain in Viscount Stratford's male eyes immediately reached a peak, but it vanished the next moment. His expression turned extremely cold as a gibing look appeared in his eyes. It was as though the one being cursed wasn't him, but Trissy, female, who was a distance away. Trissy, female, who was in the corner of the warehouse, suddenly burst into black flames. Dense, countless spider webs appeared, but they couldn't be lit up. In the blink of an eye, Trissy, female, was like Charmaine, female, being sealed inside a transparent cocoon. She couldn't move or escape. In a ventilation vent high above the warehouse, a figure appeared. It was a woman whose age wasn't obvious. She wore a simple and sacred white robe. She had black hair, blue eyes, looking sweet and beautiful, giving off an indescribable charm.
Katerina Pelle.
Trissy, female, seemed to expend all her strength before she shouted a name. At this moment, Viscount Stratford, male, grabbed at his body, pulling out an illusory doll covered in thick black flames. He glanced at Charmaine, female, and smiled at Trissy, female.
When it comes to matters related to life, I would never be careless. After that fellow Sykes, male, died, I knew that it would be my turn one day. Since you're hunting me, it means there are obviously others who wish to hunt you. We're very patient, afraid of scaring you away. We did nothing and waited until today. Also, your gift was pretty good.
Upon hearing Viscount Stratford's male words, Charmaine, female, who was still struggling out of habit, instantly stopped moving. Her expression turned blank. Her eyes widened, but there wasn't any focus. The look in her eyes seemed to sink deeper and deeper.
Love.
Trissy, female, suddenly laughed, seemingly mocking herself. She wasn't nervous at all. Maygur Manor. Night had fallen. After settling more than 20 guests and preparing the hunting trip the next day, Klein woke up not long after he fell asleep. His intuition had been triggered as a scene formed in his mind. Brigadier General Quonas Kilgore, male, who was wearing a shirt and pants, had flown out of the guest room's window in secret. He landed outside in complete defiance of the laws of nature.
I haven't even taken action. He came here for his own goals.
With a thought, Klein controlled a cockroach outside and turned it into his marionette. He then used its eyes to observe the surroundings. Almost at the same time, Quonas Kilgore, male, appeared. After this demigod left Maygur Manor, he immediately distorted the distance and quickly arrived by the bank of the Tussock River. He prepared himself to cross it. The cockroach watched quietly without any reaction.
He's heading for the south bank of the Tussock River. What does he want to do? Does he have the preference of hunting in the suburbs so that he can attempt to conceal such actions? He also introduced Maygur Manor to me for this reason.
Klein lay in bed and seriously analyzed Quonas's male actions. After the Mi-9 demigod stepped onto the south bank of the Tussock River, Klein suddenly recalled a matter. Back when he escaped the underground ruins where Ince Zangwill, male and company were, he appeared somewhere in the northwest of Backland. This was the south bank of the Tussock River, making it rather close to where Maygur Manor was. Chapter 1020, Means of a Demoness. As his thoughts raced, Klein suddenly switched positions with his valet, Inuni, who was in the opposite room. And under a grapevine 150 meters from the manor's main building, a slowly crawling centipede suddenly stiffened before it relaxed. Almost at the same time, its body vanished from its location. Dwayne Dante in his blue and white checkered pajamas had appeared. Klein had swapped places with his marionette again. He decided to use this method to secretly tail Quonas Kilgore and figure out where he was going or what he was planning on doing. Although he could only move 150 meters a time, and it took 2 to 3 seconds in between moves due to the process of turning the target into a marionette, this was more concealed compared to flaming jump or teleport. It made it difficult for Quonas Kilgore to detect him. After all, he was dealing with a demigod. Even in domains where one's spiritual intuition wasn't the best, a demigod wasn't to be underestimated. By the same logic, Klein didn't rely on creeping hunger to hide in the shadows. This was because it was relatively slow, even though it concealed him rather well. It was impossible for him to catch up to the demigod. Under the dark night sky, from Maygur Manor to the south bank of the Tussock River, the rats, snakes, spiders, fish that were active in that stretch of land stiffened up and turned sluggish. They were converted into marionettes one after another. With their help, Klein constantly moved without causing a stir. Soon he arrived at the south bank of the Tussock River, and after catching up to Quonas Kilgore, he maintained a distance of 1 kilometer. To a bizarro sorcerer, even if a marionette were to go beyond his range of control, it wouldn't immediately escape from its controlled state or die immediately. Without a bizarro sorcerer's consciousness as a catalyst, this process was rather slow and needed nearly 10 minutes. Therefore, Klein wasn't worried that he would lose Inuni, who was lying in bed, while he did his tailing. As long as he returned within 10 minutes, he could continue controlling his marionette. Silently, Klein followed Conus Kilgore as they went upstream. Passing through the dense forest, they climbed up a mountain beside the bank. At this moment, Conus Kilgore, who wasn't wearing a vest or coat, suddenly stopped. He checked his surroundings and widened the range of his search as though he was trying to claim his territory. Upon seeing this, Klein didn't dare stay any longer. He immediately switched places with his marionettes and retreated repeatedly, pulling away to a distance of nearly 3 kilometers from the deputy director of MI9. At this moment, he gave up control of the marionettes ahead of him. The death of a few bugs wouldn't incur any suspicion. This was all too common in the outskirts and in the forests. King of the Five Seas Nast can create a fighting environment that's favorable for him.
Will Conus Kilgore, who's also a Black Emperor pathway demigod, have the ability to demarcate such a region? He can change, boost, and use certain rules, and make whoever tails him expose themselves without being able to hide. It's very possible.
Klein warily took out a gold coin he placed in his pajama pocket. He ran it through his fingers and flipped it. This time, he deliberately controlled his strength and didn't produce a flicking sound. The gold coin flew up in silence and landed in his palm. Muy caribeshotoame. Without needing to look down, the gold coin's face was naturally reflected in his mind. It was heads. This meant that the anomaly ahead contained extreme danger.
As expected of a demigod, such abilities sure are enviable. However, do you think you can avoid my tailing?
Klein scoffed inwardly and found an abnormally secluded spot and made himself turn into Gehrman Sparrow. Following that, he clasped his hands and pressed it to his mouth, whispering,
Blessed of the sea and spirit world, guardian of the Rorstead archipelago, ruler of the undersea creatures, master of tsunamis and storms, the great Kalvatua.
After praying, Klein immediately took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived above the gray fog. He sat at the fool's seat and beckoned for the bone scepter with blue gems embedded at its tip. Then, with the help of his prayer, he utilized the sea god's scepters responding to believers and saw the area around Gehrman Sparrow. He then raised his field of view and took in the surrounding area. Using this as the origin, he expanded his vision to 5 nautical miles. This was the limit of what the sea god's scepter could observe with the help of its believers. In this way, the area where Conus Klein had designated, one that no object could escape his notice, appeared in Klein's vision. In the dock area, inside a warehouse with plenty of goods.
Love.
After Trissy chuckled, her figure grew faint as though she was bathed in the luster of a lake at night. In the blink of an eye, Trissy, who had been bound tightly with layers of silk by Demoness of unaging Katerina Pelle, turned into an illusory mirror. It was a full-body mirror taller than a person. Aqueous light shimmered within as a ghostly halo grew out of it as though it was a door leading to another world. At that moment, it didn't reflect the scene in front of it. Instead, it outlined a room, amsem playlai carly. The room was dimly lit. The bed and furniture had been diced up into countless small pieces, which were scattered everywhere. Only the central region was spick and span. Trissy stood there, wearing a dark black dress. Her hair cascaded down smoothly as it fluttered in the wind, accentuating her face's abnormal fairness. She looked like a female ghost as spoken in folk tales. She wasn't actually present and was using the illusory mirror to project her figure and strength remotely. It was as though everything was real, therefore she wasn't flustered at all when she was being controlled and hunted. Upon seeing this scene, Katerina Pelle, who wore simple and holy white robes, didn't hesitate to let out a shriek. Invisible waves quickly spread out as her hair flared up, each strand clear and distinct. They were thick and dyed with a grayish-white color. The illusory full-body mirror suddenly vibrated and shook as though it was on the brink of breaking apart. And in the messy room it reflected, the fragments of the bed, desk, and chairs turned grayish-white, losing their luster as though they were rocks. The brownish-yellow floor in front of Trissy turned into grayish-white rocks as it quickly extended towards the only human in the room, like a surging tidal wave. Trissy didn't attempt to resist as she turned around and waved her hand back while leaping towards the open window. In midair, invisible spiderwebs that belonged to her phased into existence. They turned dark as they spread towards the grayish-white colors. At the same time, the dark and profound full-body mirror produced one crack after another. Amidst illusory shattering sounds, it broke apart and vanished. However, before the full-body mirror completely vanished, the grayish-white colors receded in a strange manner inside the petrified room, materializing into a figure. The figure wore a simple, holy white robe and had luscious, raven-black hair. She looked both mature and innocent, as though she had a pair of profound and childlike blue eyes. She was Demoness of unaging Katerina, who had just been inside the warehouse a moment ago. Viscount Stratford could no longer see the situation inside the opposite room once the ghostly glow dissipated. He retracted his gaze and cast it onto Charmaine. He wore a mixed look in his eyes before he recovered.
Trissy really was patient. To deal with me, she actually spent months to nurture a new Demoness.
Viscount Stratford shook his head with a chuckle.
What did she want you to gain from me?
At that moment, with Trissy's connection being severed, the spider webs around Charmaine had loosened. They were unable to bind her and restrict her freedom. This beautiful girl wore a blank expression as she replied with a vacant look in her eyes.
She wanted me to know who you are truly loyal to.
Without waiting for Viscount Stratford to say a word, she asked hesitantly, her eyes making it obvious that she had difficulty finding the words.
How many of those promises that you made to me were real?
Viscount Stratford was taken aback before he chuckled.
You're probably the most silly and most naive Demoness I've ever met.
Charmaine's expression froze on her face as the glimmer in her eyes that she found so hard to regain faded bit by bit. Outside the warehouse, Zio and Fours were hiding in the shadows, observing the silent target area. They had followed Viscount Stratford here. Their patience had paid off, as they discovered this captain of the Royal Guard secretly leaving his mansion in the dead of the night, rushing to the dock area near the Backland Bridge. Using Zio's power as a sheriff, they followed him all the way here by keeping a huge distance between them. They had also confirmed that he had entered the warehouse in front of them. In addition, they also sensed that Viscount Stratford's condition had worsened, as though he had been injured. Fours looked at the warehouse's entrance and murmured,
Actually, we had the opportunity to take action while on our way here.
Shio replied without looking at her.
But you said it yourself, that you have a nagging feeling that things aren't that simple, and wanted to wait.
Fours replied in a self-deprecating manner.
This might be the intuition of an astrologer. It might also be an act of procrastination.
They didn't say anything more, as silence ruled once more. They continued waiting patiently. At this moment, a pitch-black flame was ignited on the rammed earth in front of them. The strange flames rapidly dispersed and kept close to the ground as it swept away. It then outlined a row of Loanese text. This is the chance you've been longing for. Seo's and Fours' pupils dilated at the same time. Then, they looked at each other, at a loss for words. After a few seconds, Fours finally couldn't help out to ask,
What do we do?